Hey everyone, I've been lurking in this community for a while now, reading so many stories, but never thought I'd actually end up sharing my own. Honestly, until recently I didn't even believe something like this was possible. My name is Annabelle, I'm 20, and like most people my age, I never really worried much about faith or religion. My life was just normal. College, hanging out with friends, scrolling endlessly through social media, typical stuff. I wasn't religious at all. In fact, I didn't even like talking about God, because it felt like one big set of rules meant to make people feel guilty or scared. Whenever someone brought it up, I'd just nod politely and quickly change the subject. Even though my life felt pretty good overall, there were these weird moments when I'd get this unsettling feeling deep inside. It usually happened late at night, when everything was quiet, and I couldn't distract myself with friends or my phone. I'd feel strangely empty, like something important was missing, but I never wanted to dig into what that feeling actually meant. Instead, I just found ways to drown it out, turning on music, texting someone, or even just watching random videos online until the feeling faded. Looking back now, I realize how much effort I put into ignoring those thoughts, never imagining that I'd soon face something that would completely flip my world upside down. So everything changed drastically on an afternoon that seemed as ordinary as any other. My best friend Emily and I had just gotten out of class, and we were laughing about some dumb joke she'd made. We were headed downtown to grab coffee, just a short walk from campus. The weather was sunny and warm, streets were crowded with students, and everything felt perfectly normal. As we stepped onto the crosswalk, I remember tilting my head back, laughing hard at something Emily said, probably about one of our professors. That's when the whole atmosphere changed in a split second. I heard this insanely loud horn blast, almost like it was right next to my ear, followed instantly by the screams of people around us. I turned just enough to see Emily's eyes widen in shock, and everything slowed down, frame by frame. I barely had time to register the enormous truck barreling straight towards us, headlights blazing and tires screeching, before it slammed into my side with unbelievable force. I didn't even feel the pain immediately, just a violent push, like I'd been suddenly yanked off the earth. Then everything spun out of control. My vision blurred into swirls of colors and shapes. Buildings, sky, asphalt, all blending chaotically. The next moment, everything was totally silent and dark, as if someone had flipped a switch and turned off all my senses. It wasn't like passing out or falling asleep. It was deeper, heavier, like sinking underwater without being able to swim back up. When my vision returned, I was completely confused. I saw Emily on the ground, screaming, clutching someone's hand, shaking uncontrollably. People were rushing toward us from all directions, some panicked and shouting into their phones, others standing back in stunned silence. That's when I saw myself, lying motionless on the asphalt, blood pooling beneath my head. My limbs were twisted in a way that didn't even look possible. My mind raced frantically. No, this couldn't be happening. There must be some mistake. I was standing right there, watching it all unfold. The panic hit me all at once. I tried to move, tried to speak, but nothing happened. My body was completely unresponsive. I couldn't feel my legs or my arms. I couldn't even hear my own voice when I tried to scream. There was no heartbeat, no breath, no weight of my body. It was like I wasn't even there anymore. The thought struck me like a blow. I was dead. I felt a wave of pure terror that I've never experienced before. I tried desperately to get back into my body, to somehow force myself to return, but I had no control over anything. I was just a spectator, trapped outside my physical self. It was at that moment that I felt an undeniable pull, an invisible force dragging me away from everything. The scene, the people, the chaos. As I looked back at Emily, helplessly calling my name, I was yanked further into the distance, and I couldn't do a thing to stop it. I wasn't rising towards a light, like some people say you experience after death. No, this felt different. I wasn't being pulled up. I was being dragged down. It wasn't like falling through air or space. It was more like being sucked into an endless black hole. The void around me wasn't empty either. It felt alive, like something was watching me, surrounding me. It was a kind of darkness I can't even describe, thick and all-consuming. The whispers started, so quiet at first that I could barely hear them. They sounded like wind rustling through dead trees. But soon, the voices grew louder and clearer. They weren't speaking any language I could understand. Some were soft, almost gentle, like a cruel lullaby, while others hissed and spat words I couldn't make out. And then they started calling my name in ways that were wrong, twisted and inhuman. My name, Annabelle, stretched out and bent, distorting the very sound of it, sending chills down my spine. The worst part was, I couldn't move. I had no body to move, no legs to run, no hands to cover my ears. I was just there, floating in a sea of darkness with no escape, with nothing to hold on to. The whispers began to grow into something much worse. They turned into laughter, but not the kind that you hear when someone is happy. No, this was cold, cruel laughter, the kind that makes your skin crawl. It was twisted and distorted, almost like it was coming from something not even human. I tried to block it out, to somehow escape it, but there was no place to go. The darkness closed in on me, and it felt like it was physically pressing down on me, squeezing everything out of me. The air, if you could even call it air, was suffocating, so cold, so empty, like it was draining my very soul. I could feel this weight wrapping itself around me, consuming me bit by bit, and then, through the haze of terror, I felt it, a presence, not from a distance, but right there, inches away from me. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it, and it was so powerful, so overwhelming, that my whole being just wanted to collapse inward. I can't explain it properly, but it wasn't human. It wasn't anything I could even comprehend. And I knew, with every fiber of my being, that whatever this was, it wanted me. The shadows around me started moving. At first, it was just flickering on the edges of my awareness, but then they started to take form, twisting, shifting like something alive. These weren't just vague shapes. They were real, tangible, but completely wrong. They had no faces, no features, but I knew they were looking at me, and they were getting closer. Every instinct I had screamed for me to run, to get away, but there was nothing I could do. My body didn't exist anymore, and even if it did, I wouldn't have been able to move. The whispers turned into screams, not mine, but others, and there were so many of them. Voices of people who were in pain, desperate, pleading, crying out for help. I could hear them, but there was nothing I could do. They were trapped, like I was. Some sounded broken, completely consumed by suffering. I tried to fight it, to push back against the shadows, but it was like trying to fight the wind. There was nothing solid to grab, nothing to stop it. I was completely at the mercy of whatever waited for me in that abyss, and I knew it wasn't going to be kind. Then, everything seemed to shift. A monstrous force lunged at me from the darkness. I couldn't see it clearly. Everything was a blur of shadows and emptiness, but I could feel it. It was massive, powerful, and ancient. It wasn't just some vague presence. It was real, it was alive, and it was hungry. I could sense its malevolence in the very air around me, and the weight of its power was suffocating. It was as if this thing had been waiting for me, had always been waiting for me. My soul recoiled in absolute terror. I didn't even have the strength to scream, and even if I could, I knew it wouldn't matter. There was nowhere to run, no way to escape. The darkness pressed in, the shadows closed around me, and I could feel this overwhelming force reaching for me. The worst part was that I didn't even understand what it was. It wasn't human. It wasn't any kind of creature I had ever seen, but it was real. It was undeniable. It was coming for me. My entire being screamed out for help, but there was no voice, no way to call for rescue. I was utterly alone in the abyss, with nothing but that thing and the suffocating blackness that surrounded me. And then, suddenly, something happened. A word, spoken in a voice that was calm but powerful enough to shatter the entire world around me. One word, and everything stopped. The crushing presence, the darkness, the suffocating terror, it all shrank away. The shadows that had been closing in on me recoiled as if they were burned, retreating from something far greater than they were. The whispers, those voices that had tormented me for what felt like an eternity, fell silent. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt since all this began: hope. It wasn't a warm, comforting feeling like the sun on your face, but it was real, undeniable. I felt a presence, and it wasn't like anything I'd ever experienced. It wasn't the terrifying force from before. This was different. This was pure light, so bright, so intense. It didn't just illuminate the darkness, it pierced through it. It wasn't just light in the way we understand it. It was power. It was purity. It was life itself, filling every part of me, exposing me completely. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't alone. I wasn't trapped. There was something there with me, something good. For a moment, I couldn't even process what had just happened. The crushing darkness had retreated, but in its place stood something indescribable. A presence. No, not just a presence, but a force. It wasn't like a person standing next to you, or even a comforting warmth that you might expect after feeling such overwhelming terror. This was something more. It was light, but not the way we usually think of light. It wasn't warm or soft, like sunlight on a summer day. This light was alive, powerful, and it seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. It filled every part of me, and I could feel it not just around me but within me, as if it had reached inside my soul and exposed every hidden part of me. The light didn't just push back the darkness, it obliterated it. And in that same instant, I felt a deep, undeniable peace. It wasn't the kind of peace you get when things settle down after a storm. No, this was something far deeper. It was the kind of peace that comes with knowing that everything, every little thing that had ever troubled me, every fear I'd had, every mistake I'd made, was now gone. I was no longer in the dark. I was no longer alone. I was surrounded by something I can't even describe in words, something that made all the pain, all the fear, feel insignificant. And then, out of nowhere, I saw him. I didn't need to ask who he was. I didn't need an introduction. The moment I saw him, I knew exactly who he was. Jesus. He wasn't glowing with some kind of ethereal light like you see in paintings. There was no halo or heavenly music playing in the background. He didn't look like the pictures you see in churches. No, he was real. So real. I could feel his presence in a way that made everything else seem unreal in comparison. He was power, authority, and love all wrapped into one. There was no mistaking it. When he looked at me, it wasn't judgment I saw in his eyes. It wasn't anger or wrath or anything that I had expected, but something far more powerful. Sorrow. Not anger, not condemnation, just sorrow. A deep, quiet sorrow. And in that moment, I understood why. Everything I had lived for, everything I thought was important, it all vanished. It didn't matter. All that mattered now was the truth, and I had ignored it. For so long, I had lived my life pretending that I could handle everything on my own, thinking that there was always time to get things right. But I had been wrong, and he knew. He knew everything about me, every choice I had ever made, every decision I had brushed off, every time I had dismissed the quiet whispers that tried to guide me toward the truth. I saw everything laid bare before me, my entire life, every thought, every action. There was nothing hidden from him, and I felt the weight of it. Every lie, every selfish act, every time I had hurt someone without realizing the full impact. I felt it all in that moment, and I couldn't hide from it anymore. There were no excuses, no reasons to justify it. It was just me, standing there, completely exposed. In that moment, I could do nothing but look at Jesus, helpless. I couldn't speak, couldn't even move. I just stood there, frozen, knowing that he saw everything. I wasn't just seeing my past, I was reliving it. Every single moment, like a movie playing in front of me. The memories of every time I had laughed at someone's faith, every time I had brushed off a moment that could have brought me closer to the truth, hit me like a ton of bricks. And it wasn't just seeing it, I felt it. I felt the pain of the lies I told. I felt the sting of every selfish choice I had made, and I felt the brokenness of the relationships I had carelessly neglected. I realized how many chances I had been given to change, to turn back, to listen to that quiet voice inside me that was always trying to guide me, but I didn't listen. I thought I had time. I thought it didn't matter. And now, standing there before Jesus, I realized that I had wasted so much of it. I wasn't being judged for the big sins or mistakes. I was being judged for all the little things, the small decisions that had led me down this path of apathy. I had ignored the truth over and over again, and it was too late to go back. Jesus didn't need to say anything. His presence alone made everything clear. I could feel his sadness, his understanding, but I also felt his love. It wasn't the love I had always imagined in a warm, comforting way. No, this was a love that could hold all the pain, all the suffering, and still have room for more. It was the kind of love that made you realize just how deeply you had fallen short, but also how much you were still worth, even when you felt like you were beyond saving. He looked at me, and with his eyes, he said everything. I could feel his heart breaking for me, not because of what I had done, but because I had ignored the truth for so long. I had let the world distract me, let it pull me away from everything that really mattered. And now, as I stood there in the light of his presence, I realized that I had wasted all those years thinking I had all the time in the world to get it right, but time was running out. He didn't say it in so many words, but I could feel it. There was no more time left to change. Everything I had ignored, everything I had pushed aside, was now right in front of me, and there was nothing I could do about it. Then, everything shifted again. The light around us began to dim, and the warmth of his presence seemed to recede. I felt it in the pit of my stomach, a sense of something horrible coming. I didn't know what it was, but I could feel it. It wasn't just an empty feeling. It was the kind of dread you get when you know something bad is about to happen, but you don't know exactly what. The vision before me changed, and I suddenly saw the world, but not the world I knew. It was twisted. Everything was wrong. The sky was black, but not the soft black of night. No, this was a deep, unnatural black, like the sky itself had been suffocated by something dark and heavy. The air felt thick, poisoned, suffocating. I saw people running through the streets, but they weren't running to escape something. They were running to something. They were running toward this huge, bright gate, a gate of light, but there was something wrong with them. They didn't see the danger. They didn't see the destruction around them. They were laughing, dancing, living their lives as if everything was fine, but I could feel it. I could feel that they were blind to what was really happening. They didn't realize that the darkness was closing in around them. They were walking straight toward it, and they didn't even know it. I watched in horror as some of them reached the gates. They begged to be let in, crying out to God, but as they reached for the gate, it pulled back from them. It was as if the gate knew they weren't ready, and no matter how much they pleaded, they couldn't get through. It wasn't just the people who had no faith. It was people who thought they were safe, people who called themselves believers, but had never truly followed him. They thought they had time, but now it was too late. They were left standing outside the gates, screaming, begging, but the gate wouldn't open for them. They were too late. And I realized something in that moment. I had been just like them. I had lived my life as if there was always going to be time, as if I could put off getting right with God. But now, I was seeing the truth. The time was running out for everyone. There was no more time to ignore it. And when the gate closed, it closed forever. There was no second chance. As the vision continued, I felt the terror growing inside me. I saw the people, lost in their own lives, oblivious to the impending doom. Some were laughing, some were chatting, while others danced as though the world was still fine. But I could see the truth. They couldn't see the thick darkness slowly enveloping everything around them. They were so caught up in their distractions, money, success, social status, that they were blind to what was coming. They didn't realize that their lives, their choices, had led them down a path that could only lead to destruction. The more I watched, the more helpless I felt. I wanted to scream, to warn them, but I couldn't. They couldn't hear me. Their eyes were so clouded by the temporary pleasures of life that they couldn't see the reality of what was happening. It was as if they were sleepwalking into their own demise, unable to understand the danger, until it was too late. And just when I thought it couldn't get worse, I saw the gates again, the massive gates of light, shining brightly in the distance. But I knew something was wrong. I knew that these people, no matter how desperate they were, wouldn't be able to get through. I saw them run toward the gates, their faces twisted in desperation, their voices pleading, calling out for mercy. Some of them even shouted his name, thinking that was enough to get them in. But the gates wouldn't open. They were stopped just short of reaching it, pulled back, as if the very gates themselves were refusing them entry. The cries, the desperation, the raw emotion in their voices, it was unbearable. Some of them had called themselves believers. They had said his name with their lips, but their hearts had never truly known him. They had lived their lives pretending they were safe, thinking that as long as they said the right words, they would be granted access to eternal life. But they were wrong. It wasn't enough. They had ignored the truth for so long. And now it was too late. They were left standing there, pleading with everything they had, but the gates remained closed. I could feel their fear, their regret, but there was nothing I could do. And in that moment, I realized something that shook me to my core. I had lived just like them. I had put off faith. I had ignored the truth. And now, I was seeing what happened to those who waited too long. I wasn't safe either. I had been given time to make things right, but I had wasted it. And now, like them, it might be too late for me. The gates, once open, were now forever shut. As I continued to witness this unfolding nightmare, the weight of what I was seeing began to crush me. These people were completely unaware of the danger that loomed over them, absorbed in their daily lives as if everything was perfectly fine. They were so engrossed in their routines, distracted by the distractions of the world, material wealth, career success, fleeting pleasures, that they couldn't see the darkness that had already started to creep in around them. It was like they were living in a haze, a fog that blocked them from the reality of what was actually happening. I watched them, helpless and desperate, as they continued to walk toward their doom. Some of them were laughing with friends, others scrolling through their phones, lost in the digital world, completely unaware that they were stumbling toward their eternal fate. The scene before me became more unsettling, as the truth of it all became undeniable. There was no rush. There was no urgency. Everyone moved at their own pace, unconcerned with the darkness closing in. It wasn't just ignorance. It was a kind of blindness that was far worse. They couldn't see the truth, and what was even worse was that they didn't want to. They thought they had all the time in the world to get it right, to make changes, to seek faith, but by the time they realized they were wrong, it would be too late. I wanted to shout, to scream at them to stop, to warn them, but I couldn't. They couldn't hear me. It was as if I was trapped in this vision, powerless, just watching as they walked straight into the darkness, their steps so casual, as if they had all the time in the world. But I knew better. I could feel it in my very soul. Time was running out. They were walking straight into the abyss, and they didn't even know it. They were so blind to the truth that they couldn't even recognize the danger when it was right in front of them. And then I saw the gates again. The massive gates of light that shone brilliantly in the distance, standing at the edge of all the chaos, representing the only hope of escape. But as I watched the people approach them, I felt a deep sense of dread building up in my chest. I already knew what was going to happen. The gates, those gates that should have been their salvation, wouldn't open for them. They were desperate, crying out in their own anguish, stretching their hands toward the light, hoping against hope that the gates would open and allow them to enter. But the gates refused. Every single person who reached out was pulled back. The gate, once a symbol of hope, now became a symbol of finality. They were stopped just inches away, as if something invisible was holding them back. I could hear their cries, their pleading voices echoing in the vast emptiness, desperate for mercy, for another chance, but it was too late. Some of them even said his name. They called out to God, believing that their words alone would be enough. But it wasn't. It never was. It wasn't enough to just say the right things, to mouth the right words. Their lives hadn't reflected what their words professed. They had called themselves believers, but they hadn't truly followed him. They had put faith off, thinking that they could get around to it later, always believing there was more time, that there would be a tomorrow, but there wasn't. And now, they were left standing there, their hands reaching out, faces filled with fear and regret, knowing that they had missed their chance. The gate remained closed, and no matter how much they begged, it wasn't going to open for them. And that was when it hit me with such force that I felt like I had been struck. I had lived just like them. I had lived my life thinking I had all the time in the world to get things right, to find faith when it was more convenient. I had ignored the warnings, pushed aside the feelings of emptiness, thought that I could do it on my own. But now, in this moment, I saw the truth. There would be no more time. The door would close, and I would have no say in it. The chances I had taken for granted were gone, just like theirs. And like them, I was left standing outside, lost, helpless, and broken, unable to enter. The reality of the situation hit me hard. The gates were now closed to me too. As the realization sank in, everything around me began to feel even more oppressive. The weight of regret, the sheer horror of knowing that I had ignored the most important truths in my life, settled over me like a heavy cloak. It wasn't just the people at the gates who were lost. It was me too. I had seen the truth laid bare before me, and I had taken it for granted. I had lived my life so carelessly, thinking I had all the time in the world, that the urgency of the situation had never fully hit me. Now I knew that time was something precious, something that couldn't be wasted. I could hear the screams of those outside the gates echoing in my mind, their voices filled with desperation, regret, and sorrow. But no one was listening. No one could hear them anymore. The gates that once symbolized hope now felt like an impenetrable wall, standing firm against those who had waited too long, those who had believed that they could live in denial forever and still be granted mercy. But mercy had a limit. It had a time frame, and that time had run out. And then, I heard it. A voice, distant but powerful, breaking through the silence. A voice that wasn't just speaking to the people at the gates, but to everyone who had chosen to ignore the truth. The time is near, it said. Judgment is coming. Many will be lost. The words hung in the air like an inescapable weight, and I knew deep down that there was no escaping the truth anymore. It wasn't just a warning, it was a declaration. There was no more time to change, no more time to repent, no more time to choose a different path. The voice continued, this time with even more intensity. Most of them don't even see it, do they? The sorrow in his voice was unbearable. I could feel it deep within me. He wasn't angry. He wasn't frustrated. He was sad. His heart was breaking for all of us who had let the distractions of life pull us away from what truly mattered. And for a moment, I felt the heaviness of his words, the weight of the eternal truth that was so often ignored. It wasn't that people didn't know. It was that they couldn't see, couldn't understand. The blindness was too complete. The distractions too powerful. They couldn't see what was coming. And when it hit, it would be too late. I turned to him, my heart trembling. They still have a chance, don't they? I whispered, desperate for some kind of reassurance. His eyes met mine, and I saw a glimmer of hope, even in the sorrow. As long as there is life, there is hope, he said softly. But the words carried a weight I couldn't ignore. Time was running out. The vision of the gates, the people pleading, the endless despair, it all started to fade, like mist being blown away in the wind. I felt myself being pulled back, but this time, it wasn't the darkness dragging me. It wasn't the terror of the abyss. No, this was different. It was like the whole world was shifting, and I was being taken back to a place where everything I had just witnessed was about to be lost forever. You must tell them, he said, his voice now both a command and a plea. Tell them before it's too late. And with that, the vision began to fade, the light began to dim, and I felt myself waking up, torn between what I had seen and the reality I was about to return to. I woke up with a violent jolt, like I was being ripped out of a dream, or maybe a nightmare that I couldn't escape from. The brilliant light, the gates, the vision of the people pleading, it all vanished in an instant. I gasped for air as if I had been drowning, and the cold, hard reality of the hospital room slammed into me. My chest heaved with every breath, my body trembling uncontrollably. I could hear the beeping of the machines, the shuffling of feet around me, and the concerned voices of doctors and nurses rushing to my side. It felt like I had been pulled back from the very edge of eternity, from a place that was so real and so final, and then suddenly thrown back into the chaos of this world. But it wasn't just the physical pain, the sharp, crushing ache in my chest, the overwhelming exhaustion. It was the emotional pain that hit me hardest. I knew, in the deepest part of my soul, that what I had seen was real. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't just a hallucination. It was the truth. And the truth felt so heavy, so undeniable, that I couldn't shake it off. My mind was spinning as I tried to make sense of it all. How could I explain this? How could I tell people what I had just witnessed? How could I make them understand that there was no time left, that the door was closing, and most of us would be left outside, unable to get in? I felt the tears welling up in my eyes, but I couldn't find the words. How do you explain hell, heaven, judgment, and eternity to people who don't believe in any of it? How do you tell them that there's more to life than what we see, more than the distractions we live for? In the days that followed, I tried. I tried so hard to tell my parents, to explain to them what had happened, but their faces, confused, worried, even skeptical, made me feel like I was speaking a language they didn't understand. The doctors explained it away as oxygen deprivation, or some kind of trauma-induced hallucination. And at first, that's what I thought too. Maybe they were right. Maybe I had just imagined it all. But deep down, I knew it wasn't a dream. I had felt it in my very being. The terror, the darkness, the overwhelming presence of Jesus. I couldn't explain it logically, but I knew it was real. At night, the strange things started happening. I'd wake up paralyzed, unable to move, yet fully aware of the presence in the room. It wasn't a comforting feeling. I could sense something watching me, something that didn't want me to speak, didn't want me to tell anyone what I had seen. The shadows would move in the corners of the room, whispering in a language I couldn't understand. I could feel the pressure around me, like something was trying to silence me, trying to prevent me from speaking the truth. It was terrifying. But in those moments, I forced myself to say the one word that had the power to make it all stop: Jesus. And every time, without fail, the presence would vanish. The shadows would retreat, the pressure would lift, and I could breathe again. But even in the quiet moments after, I knew it wasn't just about me. This wasn't just something that happened to me. It was a warning for everyone, and I had to tell them. I had to tell people before it was too late. I began to share my experience with a few close friends, the ones who would listen without judgment. At first, they didn't know how to react. Some just stared at me like I had lost my mind. They tried to comfort me, telling me it was just a bad experience, that I had been through a lot and that my mind was playing tricks on me. I could see it in their eyes. They didn't believe me. They couldn't. How could anyone understand something like this unless they had lived it themselves? But there were a few who listened carefully, even though they were scared. They asked questions, not out of curiosity, but because deep down, they felt the truth of it. I saw it in the way their eyes would widen when I spoke, the way they would look over their shoulders, like they were afraid someone was going to overhear. They didn't want to believe it, but they knew something wasn't right in the world. They had felt it too, in their own ways. Those quiet, nagging feelings, the emptiness, the constant pursuit of something they couldn't name. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't alone. These few people didn't dismiss me completely. They didn't call it a delusion. They listened. And even though they didn't understand fully, I knew that the seed of truth had been planted. And that was enough. But for everyone else, the ones who couldn't understand, it became harder to speak. It was like the world didn't want to hear this message. Like there was a wall around the truth that kept it from reaching the ears of those who needed to hear it the most. The distractions were too loud. The temptations too strong. People didn't want to think about eternity. They didn't want to face the truth about how fleeting our time here really is. And so, I kept speaking, even though it felt like a battle I couldn't win. I kept sharing the story, warning anyone who would listen, because I knew the truth. And the truth wasn't just for me, it was for everyone. I couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out, that the window of opportunity to change, to repent, to choose the right path, was closing faster than anyone realized. It wasn't a matter of belief, it was a matter of life and death, of eternal life or eternal separation. And the more I spoke, the more I felt the weight of my mission. I wasn't trying to convince anyone or win an argument. I was just trying to warn them, because I knew that most people wouldn't get a second chance, just like I had. And that thought haunted me. Every day I felt that urgency, and every day I prayed that someone would listen before it was too late. As the days passed, the weight of everything I had experienced continued to weigh heavily on me. There were moments when I could barely sleep, when the nightmares would come and I would wake up gasping for air, feeling like I was being pulled back into the darkness. The fear that I had felt when I was outside my body, the terror of knowing that I had been standing on the edge of eternity and almost missed my chance. Those feelings never quite left me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the vision again. The people running toward the gates, their faces filled with desperation, their hands reaching out for something that would never be within their grasp. And I could hear their screams. I could feel their panic, their regret, as they realized it was too late. And I knew deep down that the same fate awaited so many others who were living their lives in the same careless way I had. The thought of it kept me up at night, kept me constantly wondering if there was more I could do to make people understand. But every time I tried to speak, I was met with skepticism or dismissal. It was like I was invisible, like my words didn't matter. But I couldn't stop. I couldn't give up. I knew the stakes were too high. One night, as I lay awake, struggling to quiet my racing thoughts, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't a physical change, but something deeper, something spiritual. I realized then that this wasn't just about warning others. It wasn't just about speaking the truth or trying to convince people that there was more to life than what they could see. It was about waking up to the reality of the world we live in, to the reality of eternity, and the choices we make every single day. I had spent so many years of my life asleep, caught up in the distractions of the world, pretending that everything was fine, pushing aside the feelings of emptiness, ignoring the truth. But now, I couldn't unsee what I had seen. I couldn't ignore the reality of what awaited those who refused to listen, to wake up. And it hit me. This experience wasn't just a message for others. It was a message for me too. I had been given a second chance, a rare opportunity to change my life, to live it differently, to truly follow the truth. But time was running out. I could feel it. The urgency that had been there since the moment I woke up in the hospital was still there, and it wasn't going away. The window of opportunity was closing, and all I could do was speak the truth, keep warning others, and pray that they would listen before it was too late. Days turned into weeks, and life slowly began to return to some semblance of normality. But I was different. How could I not be? I couldn't unsee the things I had seen, couldn't forget the truth that had been revealed to me. It had shaken me to my core, and I knew I couldn't go back to living the way I had before. I started to find new purpose in everything I did. The simple things, spending time with family, talking to friends, even studying, began to feel different. Every moment became more precious, more meaningful. I started living with an awareness that I had never had before, always thinking about the choices I was making, how they would affect my future, and the future of others. I found myself sharing my story more openly, not to convince people, but to simply warn them. There was no more time for debate. There was no more time to argue about whether or not God was real, whether or not faith mattered. I knew the truth, and I couldn't stay silent about it. But I also knew I couldn't change anyone's heart. That was up to them. My job was to speak the truth, to share my experience, and leave the rest in God's hands. I still think about that moment every day, the moment when I stood before Jesus and saw the truth of my life. It's a heavy burden to carry, knowing what I know, feeling the weight of it every time I hear someone dismiss the idea of faith, every time I see someone choose their own path over the truth. But it's also a great responsibility, a responsibility to speak, to share, to warn. I know I've been given a second chance, a chance to live differently, to live with purpose, and I will never take that for granted again. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that there is no more time to waste. Tomorrow is not promised. The only moment that matters is the one we have right now. And if you're reading this, please don't ignore the warning. Please don't wait until it's too late. I was given a second chance, but most people won't get one. Time is running out, and we need to wake up before it's too late. I can't say it any clearer than that. You have a choice, and it's a choice that will define everything. Don't wait. Don't put it off. Take the chance to make things right now, before it's too late.